It's 2025 and a new year means brand new opportunities. And for a lot of you out there, I know you've been thinking about one thing over the holidays, and that is starting your own business. But you have so many questions like how do I get started? How do I come up with a brand? How do I even sell stuff to people? And what am I even going to sell? Now take a deep breath. Shopify has got you. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. And you can get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. You don't have to be a coding nerd or a design geek to get this done. All you need to do is drag and drop. Shopify also helps with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, so you can focus on the important stuff, like growing your business. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/truecrime, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/truecrime to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/truecrime.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my sunshine co-host, Brett.
Sunshine. I love it. I love it. I'd like to think I'm shiny.
Well, Brett, I'm sorry, but the sunshine I'm talking about isn't really you. The sunshine are our esteemed guests and co-hosts for today, the Murder Sheet, who shine all of their sunlight onto documents, onto the judicial system, on the Delphi case, and we are just basking in their glow.
Let's not give them too much credit now. Come on.
Well,
get big
actually, we should give them credit because directly as a result of their filing in the Richard Allen Delphi murders case, the court unsealed 118 documents today, which is a huge, huge deal because, as you guys know, so much of this case from the day the girls really were reported missing has been in the dark, right? We've been in the dark, misinformation, both from kind of the Reddit world, the true crime world, as well as from the investigators. So please help me welcome the Murder Sheet. Anya and Kevin, thank you guys for being here.
Thank you so much. That was such a nice introduction.
That was really sweet. Thank you so much.
No, I truly mean that because oftentimes the court has a lot going on, right? Especially in a case like this that has a lot of media attention. And sometimes when no one speaks up and says something as apparent as the rest of us like to know, like, guys, the public doesn't know anything. And that's not the way the judicial system works. We're not in the investigative stage. We have a man who is behind bars facing charges, and yet the public still knows nothing. And when you point that out to the court, that was, the court listened and the court moved on your motion. And so I really do mean that, the public, in this case, your filing was the difference between, I say sunshine because sunshine laws, the whole point of sunshine laws is to let the public know what's going on in the inner workings of our judicial system, which affects every single one of us.
Thank you.
There you go. What do you say to that, guys?
I'm like blushing.
Keep talking.
No.
I'm loving
Well,
this.
with that, let me just say this. The documents dropped today. I assume that you guys got access to the documents when the rest of the world got access to them. So 118 documents. Have you read them all? Before we dive into them, I mean, just, high level, what did you think when you first, opened those links and saw these documents?
Yeah, we were like in a panic mode earlier today when we were just reading, like trying to read. Like I read the bottom half, Kevin was reading the top half. It was kind of, so we definitely probably missed stuff. For me, the biggest thing was contextualizing the confessions a little bit more and getting some more color on what exactly happened. That's the journalist in me. So I'm like, okay, that's what everyone's talking about. I think Kevin probably has a different take in terms of like the legal proceedings.
I thought it was really interesting to try to start building a little bit of a timeline with facts we already knew. Like we know, for instance, that back on, I believe, April 5th, the defense filed a motion to modify safekeeping order in which they suggested that Allen had begun to mentally deteriorate. So then it became very interesting to know that just a couple of days before that, on April 3rd, we now know that Alan made the first of 5 to 6 confessions over the phone to a family member.
And you want to be more specific? We've heard 5 to 6 confessions. Who were they to, and in what context were they made?
From the files released today, we learned they were to his wife and to his mother. And they were 5 to 6. We don't know whether it was 5 to 6 separate calls or multiple admissions made in one call. We don't know exactly what was said either. We don't have a transcript, but they were on basically a phone call between them, which of course is recorded. You mentioned that last time we spoke, like that's all recorded. You have no expectation of privacy here. The prosecution has all that now. And so, it certainly takes away the idea that this was some sort of jailhouse snitch situation, because I'm sure his wife was not, interrogating him.
And I want to pat ourselves on the back, all 4 of us, because the last time we were together, there were a couple things we talked about. Number one, we speculated, more than speculated, that the reason for that filing was because of these confessions. That at that point, the defense strategy changed from, just typical sort of how we're going to win this to how we're going to keep these out. And the only way to do it is he was incompetent, out of his mind, couldn't even recognize the disclaimer at the beginning of the phone call that tells him it's recorded, wasn't a voluntary, whatever they're going to say, that was going to be their argument. And number two, that the phone calls would get them. And we talked about phone calls and how often people do this. Like you said, the fact it's not jailhouse snitches is huge, because we all know how jailhouse snitches are. They're not very good. I think short of him coming in and sitting down with the prosecution and on a videotaped interview admitting what he did, this is as good as you're going to get. And Alice and I have seen a lot of cases where this kind of evidence is what either convicts them at trial, if they even bother to go to trial, or eventually leads to some sort of plea deal. It seems like, one irony about the filings is there were so many filings where the defense was trying to quash subpoenas by the prosecution to seek mental health records on the basis of he hasn't shown any problems with his mental health. Well, now it seems like, oh, wait, never mind. He actually has all sorts of problems with his mental health. I mean, that's where this is going, right? I mean, after looking at these, isn't that where this has to go next?
Yes, the mental health issue and, the competencies. And of course, it does raise questions about, not guilty by reason of insanity. Obviously, the defense has not made any indication that they want to go that route. So that's just.
And also, of course, at least so far, they've argued that basically he was in his right mind up until the time he made these confessions, basically. So that would seem to rule out a not guilty by reason of insanity, because for that plea to work, he would have to have been insane at the time of the crime.
Back in 2017.
Great points. Right. And, I haven't read all 118 documents. So if I misspeak somewhere, you guys can, I assume between the 4 of us, we've read enough of them to cover it all. But it seems like these 5 or 6 confessions happened at least by April 3rd, or at least this is what I think by reading the filings. He made a bunch of calls. He was just calling people, and they all happened on that day. And before he could say more things, his attorneys cut him off and were like, dude, these are all recorded. Everything you say can and will be used against you. It doesn't matter if it's your mom or your wife. There's no spousal privilege because the confessions come from the party opponent. And we've said this before. It's not hearsay. When you're on one side of the V, you're the party opponent, and everything you say is actually admissible and is not hearsay. And so the wife doesn't have to testify to anything because the jailhouse call is his words. It's not her saying you did it. It's him saying I did it. And I have no idea, because they didn't have the transcript of the call, but that's why it's allowed, even though typically you have spousal privilege. But people get caught up in this because they sometimes think spousal privilege applies on these jailhouse calls. And they do, in the sense that your spouse can't be compelled to come testify, but your own words are your own testimony against yourself. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I think that he was just making calls, a lot of calls, because we have some indication from the filings that he was making 2 or more calls a day. And then all of a sudden he stops making calls and mentally deteriorates, or whatever you want to call it. But basically he has a change in behavior for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. But before that time, he was seemingly making lots of calls on, whatever device that he was able to have access to. So what do you guys think about that? Do you think it had been a stream of them, or he was just talking, and then until somebody stopped him?
I think you raised some really good points in favor of it being a number of different instances that kind of culminate. And I think the one thing that goes in favor of more of it being one very messy call where he's saying multiple times, on the phone to maybe both his mom and wife are standing there hearing this, is that it mentions, one of the documents mentions that his wife actually like hung up on him. So one could imagine a situation where he keeps repeating himself and she's like, I don't want to hear this, and just hangs up essentially. So I don't know which it is, but either way, it's kind of like, I mean, it's bizarre. And one thing I think is so interesting is that April 3rd, he's been calling people, he's been calling his wife, calling his mom. He has a little like tablet device that he's able to do that with and has access to that. He breaks the tablet at some point after that. He stops calling, he stops reaching out, he stops sleeping, he starts eating his own paperwork. And it's like he just devolves from there. And it's kind of like, I mean, it's such a turning point, right? Like it's like haunting.
And I'm going to just go ahead and read this excerpt from this in case people haven't seen it, so they know sort of how this went down and you know the timing and sort of the order of things. So basically in this filing, one of the many filings that was released, it includes a sort of, I mean, it's a long recitation of everything that's happened in the case. And at some point it gets to when he is taken to this prison facility for his own safety. And in some of the filings in this case are filings by the local jail saying, hey, we can't handle this. This guy's going to have all sorts of threats. There's a law that says if we can't handle it, he needs to go to a facility like this, which, you know, is not that surprising or interesting. It's only surprising or interesting in that if you're somebody who thought it was weird or unlawful or something that he's being kept in a prison, there's a reason for it. And they followed the law and they filed stuff with the court. The court granted it and everything else. So at that point, it says, upon Richard Allen's arrival at the facility, he was placed on suicide watch because of certain statements he made about harming himself. Throughout his stay, his mental health improved to the point that he was taken off of suicide watch. He was also participating in recreation time and beginning to exercise. The facility reports that he was doing well and that they had no issues or concerns. His day-to-day demeanor was that he was quiet, read a lot of books, did crossword puzzles, and exercised daily. On April 3rd, 2023, Richard Allen made a phone call to his wife, Kathy Allen. In that phone call, Richard Allen admits several times that he killed Abby and Libby. Investigators had the phone call transcribed, and the transcription confirms that Richard M. Allen admits that he committed the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. He admits several times within the phone call that he committed the offenses as charged. His wife, Kathy Allen, ends the phone call abruptly. Soon after, attorneys for Richard M. Allen filed an emergency motion to modify a safekeeping order. In that motion, the defense states that Richard M. Allen's mental state had declined because Westville Correctional Facility is unfit and that he should be moved. Defense also makes allegations that his mental health has declined to the point where Richard Allen has been deprived of his constitutional right to assist in the defense of his case. Further, defense alleges that his mental capacity has declined because of his incarceration at Westville Correctional Facility. Defense also challenged that his treatment is unconstitutional. Soon after, investigators were made aware by the warden of Westville that Richard M. Allen began to act strangely. Richard Allen was wetting down paperwork he had gotten from his attorneys and eating it. He was refusing to eat and refusing to sleep. He would go days on end refusing to sleep. He further broke the tablet that he used for text messages and phone calls. He went from making up to 2 calls a day as of April 3rd to not making any phone calls at all. To date, Richard M. Allen still has not made a phone call since April 3rd. On April 14th, Allen was evaluated by 2 psychiatrists and 1 psychologist to discuss his turn in behavior and whether or not there was a need for involuntary medication. The panel would also discuss moving Richard Allen to a different facility that has a psychiatric unit. From that meeting, it was determined that Richard Allen did not need involuntary medication and that he did not need to be moved to another facility. Since that meeting, Richard Allen has begun to eat again and has begun to sleep. His behavior has begun to return to what it was prior to making the admission on April 3rd.
That's really helpful. Always go back to the documents, as we say. Love to hear y'all's thoughts, but there are lots of ways to interpret his behavior after April 3rd. If you read the way that filing reads, because the wife ends the phone call abruptly, it sounds like this was the first time he at least maybe said those exact words. Maybe she suspected, maybe she was part of all these things, but kind of ending abruptly at least has an effect on the person who's making the confession, right? And we've probably all been in that situation where I've thrown my phone before after like a really bad conversation, right? I see that you guys are raising a hand on that. So you guys are very close to the facts on these things, kind of with that timeline. Do you have any Any thoughts on other ways to interpret this other than just a mental decline? It could be that. That's certainly what this filing is indicating, that after April 3rd, he declined. But there could be lots of reasons for a decline other than being in solitary confinement or being in confinement. And there could also be different ways to read his actions, wetting down paper and eating papers his attorneys gave him. What were those papers, right? Like I've burned old love letters before, right? I don't think I'm crazy, but I've definitely treated certain papers that had emotional meaning to me in ways that may have sounded crazy if you wrote about them in a literary manner. So I'd love y'all's thoughts.
That very well said. And also we always have to be like mindful. We've talked to mental health professionals on the show before about like the concept of malingering, right? People faking mental illness to get preferential treatment or to basically manipulate the system. Turns out it's kind of hard to do well enough to get away with it, because usually mental health professionals have ways to kind of be like, okay, like, are these really the symptoms that are like making sense? And that's interesting to me that he met with them and they basically said, we don't need to involuntarily medicate you and we don't need to take you anywhere. I'm not saying that definitely means he's malingering, but it's just interesting that they didn't take drastic action at that time. I guess to me, like, I feel like it's hard to say, and like to give the defense some credit. I know we've talked to inmates of Westville who were in Gen Pop for drugs and then got sent to the MCU, the maximum control unit, for bad behavior. And one of them was like, you know, it didn't really bother me that much. I kind of like being away from everybody. And then one guy was like, I was kind of losing it and I had to like reread my book about Dillinger again and again to like stay sane. And so I think like it can affect you really badly, but I think everything coinciding around April 3rd makes it sound more like he's reacting to this situation with his wife, who I will say was at his last hearing. You know, I mean, she was there in June, so I don't know if perhaps she's kind of on the side of, okay, he's mentally declining.
Now, one thing I wanted to add, and this is a good place to add it since you're frozen, is I think you said, though, that was the first time, or maybe not the first time, but of the times you've been there, maybe somebody else said this, that he came in and he didn't like mouth "I love you" or something to them. Like, what wasn't there a little bit different this time than it had been in the past when they had in-person hearings?
Yes, this was the first time they didn't make eye contact. His eyes were kind of glazed. He looked out of it. He didn't seem to acknowledge her at all as he walked by her. It was like he didn't even realize she was there.
Yeah, so I mean that could be significant. I mean, if that ties into, it just so happens that this would have been the first hearing since April 3rd, right? I mean, this was the first in-person hearing, or am I making that up?
No, that is correct.
So, I mean, that's also interesting, right? She's still there.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm making too much out of that, but that's a little subtle change that.
He did have an in-person visit with his wife, I believe, at the end of May, however. And that was discussed at the last hearing.
Yes, where there was a lot of conflict over why they weren't provided a glass of water, and there was a lot of back and forth about this, but basically talking about the conditions he's held in. So she may be on the defensive side that, hey, he's an innocent man, he's just mentally declining, that's why he's saying these things. You know, I can imagine from her perspective, maybe he's trying to protect me by driving me away, you know, even if he is innocent. So I can see things from that perspective. But
one thing I think is interesting, I'm paraphrasing this, but at one point, the prosecutor in one of these filings says, we don't believe that whatever mental stress he is facing is because of the conditions at the facility. We believe it's because of the condition of the case and what he's facing in his personal situation.
And like, I'm not a psychologist. I am Irish Catholic, so I know guilt. You know, like I felt very guilty about things in life. Nothing as horrible as a murder or like a crime. But like, I can almost, I mean, this is just me speculating, but I can almost see someone being in a position where they do feel very guilty about something horrible that they did, and it causes them to spiral mentally. Maybe they don't meet the definition of insanity, but maybe they lean into that behavior because it's easier to drive people away that way than dealing with what you've done. But I'll also add, I can also see like an innocent man kind of losing it. So I don't want to sound biased, but the guilt thing did kind of, I could see that, I guess.
No, I mean, we've actually, Brett and I have seen that specifically with witnesses who like come in and tell us everything. I mean, there was a reason we went looking for them to talk to them, but they are like, I was going crazy. I was looking behind me, waiting for you to come arrest me. I just need to tell you. And they know what they're admitting to, but guilt is a very real thing and it can drive one mad, especially when in this case, I mean, there is a case against him, right? And here's the thing though, his wife, in addition to being able to talk to him, both in that in-person meeting and over the phone, she actually has access to all of these filings that have been under seal because the attorneys, unless for some reason she was like, I'm not going to be part of this, but if she's at the hearing, if she's meeting with him, she is probably in close contact with the attorneys, and the attorneys can speak to her because there is spousal privilege. And we can talk more about how that's different from the recorded call. But very likely she knew what was in these filings, and the arguments that the defense is basically making about the decline, they would have been articulating this to her and probably they're not just trying to sell it to the prosecution or to the court. They're going to try to sell it to everyone who could be a support for him, right? Because the jury does look over, all of us look over to see who's sitting behind him to support him. And it certainly is stark when a defendant who is accused of an incredibly heinous crime, the murder of children, is abandoned by those closest to him, right? That does have an effect on the jury. And defense attorneys know that. They absolutely know that. And so I think it's not fair to read into her mind. It's impossible to read into her mind why she's sitting there. It could be as simple as let the jury make up their mind, but I'm not going to be the deciding factor by abandoning him at this point, or what have you. Or I want to be here and hear all of it. If he did this, I want to know everything. And the best way to do that is to sit in the courtroom and hear all of it, right? So it could be a number of reasons, but I think it's very interesting the effect seemingly that call had on him that day.
And of course, we're going to find out a lot more in the future. I mean, this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. I mean, what the transcript of that call, and we may not find that out until there's a trial or some sort of more in-depth proceeding, which I noticed, by the way, in the response to the discovery request by the prosecution, that they did say this had not gone to grand jury. So I assume that is still true, that it hasn't gone to grand jury, which means there may be at some point a preliminary hearing to determine probable cause. I don't know. Him confessing will probably cross that hurdle, so they might just decide to waive that one. But the transcripts of these calls and what exactly was said, best case for him, he says, I did it. Worst case for him, he starts to actually go into detail about what he did. And, that matches up with what the prosecution knows and what they saw at the crime scene. And if he did that, I mean, I don't know, guys. I mean, I hate to say it's just over because obviously people falsely confess, and maybe the defense will get some sort of Hail Mary exclude this because of his mental state at the time or some other technicality. But it's just reading back through that affidavit, I am so struck by the fact that he basically admits to being bridge guy, that he basically says, oh yeah, all those people who saw somebody, that was me, and I was wearing exactly what they said bridge guy was wearing, and I went to the bridge, but I didn't see anything because I was looking at my stock ticker. Like, it's just that people who want to say this is a weak case, that has just always blown my mind, that basically you have to believe he is bridge guy, but bridge guy didn't do it. That's what you basically have to believe to think he didn't do it. And that's not even to add in like the bullet evidence and now the confession. So
for what it's worth, at the hearing a couple of weeks ago, when the defense attorneys, Brad Rosie, disputed the characterization of these as confessions, he said something to the effect that a confession suggests some sort of coherent, consistent story that is told more than once. And he made it sound as if he believed that this was more like incoherent and inconsistent statements.
I mean, his two interviews with police before he was arrested were inconsistent with each other, right? He did change his story. So it's kind of how finely you split hairs, right? Like it's from I had a blue jacket to I had a black jacket, completely different, to I was looking at the stock ticker. That's kind of incoherent. Why would you be on that rickety bridge, where people are like very slowly and watching and trying not to fall into, the ravine below them, that you'd be looking at a stock ticker? You could characterize that as incoherent. Like that doesn't seem like a likely story. So lawyers are really good at characterizing and I can see where that, even just based on his two interviews pre-arrest, back when this all happened, those two stories were inconsistent. and incoherent at times with each other. And I want to bring back really quick, I don't want to talk too much about the wife, but obviously that was the big reveal today. I don't know whether she knew before that particular confession, but remember when before he was arrested, they went and talked to his wife and she said, yeah, he totally has that jacket. He still has it. Yeah, he has guns. And the way she spoke so freely, even at the time, I got the impression that she was speaking truthfully and forthrightly with absolutely nothing to hide because she thought she had nothing to hide. I cringed inside as I was reading what she was saying because even though he had not been arrested at the time, I was like, man, she has no idea. And who knows if she had any idea by April 3rd, but I do not think this is a situation, or at least her past conversations with the police have not indicated that she's like making up stories for him or alibis for him. In fact, it's the opposite, right? She's helping bolster his own testimony that he was there, an essentially bridge guy.
Yes, I think that's really well said and so important to remember. I think sometimes people want to like blame everybody like involved in a situation, like blame police, blame the wife, and it's like, we don't know all the facts. And also when you're married to someone for that long and there's such trust, I mean, I don't think any of us can imagine the level of that kind of betrayal if he turns out to be guilty. And I think we should just give a lot of grace to the people sort of who are actually directly impacted in this horrible tragedy.
Very well
I think
said.
that's absolutely true. And that is one of the things that people forget all the time. I mean, the way people attack family members of people who do horrible things. And it's like, man, there, but for the grace of God, you better hope that never comes back around on you, because lots of times, and I know people always say it. They always say it. I don't know how you can be married to somebody who does something like that and not know it. Well, people have been married to serial killers and had no idea.
And imagine asking yourself that question. I laid next to this man every day for the past, several decades. I have a child with him. We share a home together. This was my forever home. This was my life. Like my life is, it's literally like the Truman Show, waking up and realizing your entire life, the basis of what you believed was your life, is shattering and maybe never existed. I mean, I can't even begin to understand the devastation that could cause anyone and could drive anyone crazy, right? I mean, it truly is a shattering of who you are and the basis of what is truth and who everyone around you is.
Yeah, 100%. One thing I want to talk about, and we can come back to all these issues, so I don't want to scare anybody away, but there are lessons to be learned in this. And one of the lessons which I always try and remind people of is just because a defense attorney files something doesn't mean it's significant. And one of those things is the May 19th, 2023 motion to suppress, which got all sorts of press because we couldn't read it, right? And everybody's like, oh, they filed a motion to suppress. I hear these always succeed. I mean, literally had somebody who was like, this guy, the last 3 he filed were successful and all this other stuff. Well, now we have it. And it is the most boilerplate motion to suppress I've ever seen. And I assume at some point they would flesh it out with like actual arguments that are tied to the case. But this motion itself says nothing.
Yeah, I was surprised by that because I'd seen this attorney, Andy Baldwin, has filed motion to suppress in other cases, including another recent case here where he got a gun thrown out in a multiple homicide case.
Triple homicide.
And the motions were much more detailed than this. This read like the first page of a much longer motion that we don't get to see.
So, but he can add to it later. Is that what you're saying? Like there can be an opportunity to flush it out, perhaps?
I mean, it's supposed to all be there now.
It's supposed to be.
It's supposed to be there now. No, this is not like the precursor. It's not a notice to file. Right. Sometimes you'll get those one pagers that are like notice of intent to file something like, please court, don't rule on this motion because we intend to appeal, for example, but we are still working on our fulsome brief. That's not the case here. But you can imagine they had to do something. We said this last time in our live, right? When you have something like 5 to 6 confessions that are jailhouse court recordings and it's your own words, you have to do something or the case is over. And so if that's a Hail Mary boilerplate motion to suppress, of course I would run in there and be like, gotta suppress this. Based on the very, very bare bones, what I imagine a court would do, max, would be to say, the information that you'd like to argue is reason for this to be suppressed is actually just cross-examination fodder. So this confession gets to come in, but then you get to show the situation in which he was in solitary confinement, he hadn't eaten in days, blah, 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 which is not true, actually. But you can see that the judge would say, you haven't shown me why this should not come in, because competency is about your defense. It's not necessarily about what you say. You get to bring in the surrounding information to basically give it less weight and convince the jury. Who cares? He spouts off all the time, but we're not going to just suppress things he says because it looks bad on you. That's the whole point of having a jury, is I'm not going to decide the weight of all this information. Sometimes people confess falsely. Tell the jury, your arguments for what it is, but they get to hear the confession and your arguments for why not to believe him. And then the jury gets to go back there and do their job, their constitutional duty, to weigh that evidence and decide which one they believe. So that's kind of how I think this thing will come out. And I don't imagine any type of additional argument they can make to convince me otherwise. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, in terms of suppressing the fruits of the search warrant, they did say at the hearing a couple of weeks ago that there are Franks versus Delaware issues, which basically means that they are alleging that some officers involved in the preparation of the search warrant either lied or omitted key facts. Now, they haven't explained what exactly those lies and omissions are. I was hoping that those would be explained in documents that were released today, but it wasn't.
And I'll just say this about a Frank's hearing. I'm going to try and come back on camera. I like to see myself.
Surprises nobody.
A Frank's hearing requires a preliminary showing by the defense who's seeking one. So you can't just ask for it. Like, you have to actually show proof, some reason to believe that the police officers lied, misled, or omitted material information for the magistrate judge. So they do have to make a showing of that. So it cannot be a bare bones filing. As far as whether or not they're going to file something else, I always leave open the possibility of local rules. I mean, they can be different. Maybe in this one court in Indiana, the way you do it is you file a very bare bones motion, and at some point the court sets a briefing schedule and says, hey, I got your motion. Let's brief this issue. And this is not the only area they did it. You guys all know that they're challenging the forensics on the firearm. Well, their motion to challenge that was exactly the same. Very bare bones. They basically just say, 702. So they're, okay. But they don't give any explanation for why they don't think this is good science, why they should be excluded. Presumably that will come at some later point. But up to this point, the things they have filed give us no information about the kind of arguments they're planning on bringing and if those arguments have any merit whatsoever.
Very well said.
Yeah, I know certainly there's been a recent case, I believe, in the Supreme Court of Maryland where some ballistics evidence was ruled inadmissible. And I hear a lot of chatter about that. But of course, that's a Maryland case. Indiana is very different.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've seen those arguments made. The fact of the matter is ballistics is getting better and better. And so I just think it's a loser. I think it's going to be a loser in this case. And frankly, it's not going to matter because he's confessed 5 times. But I guess we'll just have to see how it goes. I mean, honestly, there was some guy, I guess, today who read like all these on his YouTube page. And that must have been the most boring YouTube broadcast ever, because I would say 80% of them are pure boilerplate. It's like, motion to quash or, motion the judge recusing himself. Now, one thing, I closed it out before I read it. In his motion to recuse himself, did the judge give any reason, or did he just say, hey, I'm recusing?
I don't know if I read that one. That was a whole thing, though. I mean, that was, Diener,
Yeah.
bloodlust. Like, he was getting overwhelmed. And frankly, I give him a lot of credit for stepping down, because I think that was probably for the best. If he felt...
You should explain the bloodlust quote.
The bloodlust quote. Okay, so... he's getting a lot of emails. His court's getting a lot of emails from reporters and, probably some members of the public basically asking for information, or where's this search warrant, or where's that. So he starts like responding to some of the media inquiries with like these really kind of ranty emails in response, like, how dare you? Like, I'm a judge. And it's a lot. He has a bit of a reputation for kind of being, that way. And then he wrote some big response to the sheriff of Carroll County's transport order, like just a transport, like, hey, we need to move him. And it's like, the public's bloodlust on this case. People are making YouTube videos about me. And like, like a lot. And then shortly after, he recused himself. So I didn't read the recusal order or anything in this, but the background of that was he basically like was saying, I can't handle this at all, which again, I respect because it's a lot. But then basically Indiana Supreme Court appointed Judge Fran Gull, who's very well respected in Indiana. She's out of Allen County, which is where Fort Wayne is. And like, she's been there, she's been a judge since like the 90s. She's been doing this a while, and she's, been credited with a lot of like innovative, kind of practices. And so I think, she's done some high profile cases too. I think they felt she's a better fit for this.
One thing I wanted to mention, so I guess Cass County is where they're talking about moving him. Is that right? Like if they move him from because they, I'm fascinated by, I have no background really in psychiatry or anything, but I was reading through the sort of, if he goes to Cass County Jail, what it'll be like. And one of the things I thought was, if he's on suicide watch, he's not allowed face-to-face visits or any rec time. And I'm just not sure if someone was suicidal, why that's the ideal way to treat them. I mean, I guess the idea is that
like maybe don't give them a jump rope, but like let them go run the track.
Exactly. Like just locking them away in a room and not let them see anybody or do anything doesn't seem like a very good way to deal with
it seems like
suicidal ideation, but I don't know.
Yeah. It seems like his life would be so much worse in Cass County based on that. And then also they don't have like full-time mental health staff. But at the same time,
right.
Like, his lawyer would be right there. Brad Rosie, based in Cass County, so he'd be right
He's
there.
literally right across the street.
So
I mean, you guys have already noted that the judge seized on that. Like, I'm sorry, but it is not about the ease for the attorney, right? I mean, attorneys drive all over the state when they, or further when they have to go meet with their clients. And so while that may be good, I promise you, this attorney is not going to be like spending 8 hours a day hanging out with him, even if that were the case.
I was going to say, I totally got what he was saying. Like, we spend a lot of time driving. We want to build a rapport with him. We want to do our best. So, like, I got what he was saying. But, like, I think he lost the narrative on that strand a little bit. And then the judge smacked him down. And it was a little bit like, oh, my goodness, when she went for that. And I think, I got what he was saying, but I was also like, when she responded that way.
And I just thought, and this wasn't, there was this weird, I mean, first of all, I don't really understand. I guess this is my own personal like anger at defense attorneys. I don't understand why every time a defense attorney files something, everybody just believes them. Like they don't believe us when we file stuff, but if a defense attorney files it, man, it's gospel. So the defense attorney filed this like, he's at Abu Ghraib filing that they did. And I was like, and all these people were like, they need to move him to county jail. It's like, why do y'all think the county jail's better than the prison? The prison's got way more resources than the county jail. And I feel like this Cass County thing, which is where they want him to go, sort of reinforces that. Because you look at what Cass County can do for him, it is basically nothing. So, it might be easier for his lawyer who can now walk across the street and say hello to him. I do not think it will be better for Richard Allen.
And also the kind of complaints that, there was one letter from like a fellow inmate who was saying, oh, people are calling him a child killer. And like, he's getting, by the way, it is true. People who molest or kill children are hated by all criminal defendants for a good reason. And he would face those attacks just about anywhere. It doesn't, so rote. That's just going to be something that you hear all the time. And it's not going to get better when you move. It's not like they're not going to know what he's going to do, because guess what? The prison guards know, people know this case. They get access to television, by the way. They probably watch, a lot of news. It's probably on all the time. So it's not like he's going to be able to go undercover at the next prison. And so his identity is not going to be a secret.
And for what it's worth, I'm not sure how compelling we should find the testimony of the author of that letter. Not only is he a convicted child molester, he has a history of filing jailhouse lawyer motions that are frankly pretty frivolous. At one point, for instance, he's doing a 40-year sentence for child molestation. At one point, he files a motion saying, well, if I agree to take the COVID vaccine, well, then you should cut my sentence in half to 20 years. That made my blood boil. He also said that his 6-year-old victim, who they had, his DNA, it was a very solid case and a disgusting case, frankly. She didn't act like a victim. Okay. Just like, another point, he said he should be released immediately so he could go and help fight COVID on the front lines.
Yeah,
that's just who we need.
That's the brain trust that we need this guy. He's totally incoherent. And frankly, I kind of feel like if prosecutors are going to be discouraged from using jailhouse snitches, which I, tend to agree with, because there's an incentive that's a problem there. And I'm not saying every jailhouse snitch is lying. It's just more of like there's problems there. But then I don't really feel like a jailhouse snitch on the other side is going to, I don't really see how compelling or helpful that is, especially this guy.
Mm-hmm.
We had inmates, former Westville inmates on our show, very compelling guys, and everything they said about their own charges like matched up, and we verified them and whatnot. And so I'm not saying that anyone who happens to be incarcerated can't be trustworthy. That's not the case at all. But I think in this case, he seems to have his own agenda and is talking to the New York Times and stuff. And it's like, friggin' Bastone. I'm so mad.
I think everything you've said is absolutely, our experiences. Jailhouse snitches are not our go-to. They're not the best source of information. They are fraught, and oftentimes they are not accurate. Whether it's boredom, whether it's trying to be, get some good time favor, just wanting to feel like they have something to contribute. But the amount of times that Brett and I have had, the promise of this guy in prison who knows something and it's going to crack the case wide open, like a dime a dozen. And has it ever actually done it? Not in my recent memory. Has it ever actually been an accurate piece of information from a jailhouse snitch? So what you're saying is actually pretty common, and all prosecutors kind of have to look at it very carefully. And it's not our favorite way of getting information.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, is there anything else in the documents we need to talk about? I feel like we've gone through most everything, but if you guys saw something else that's interesting.
One thing that I thought was somewhat interesting was there's information in there that dispels some of the sillier rumors that have been out there. For one thing, you often have heard a rumor on the internet that when police did the search, they went into the backyard and dug up Richard Allen's dead cat and took cat hairs, which they then matched to cat hairs found at the crime scene. The search warrant return is included in these files, and there's nothing in there about them recovering the body of a dead cat.
People should just start writing fiction instead of going on these Reddit subs and running them up. It's just like, you have such a great imagination, go for it, but this is not the place nor the time. And that could just spread. It just spreads, and then everyone's asking us about cat hair all day, every day, and you're just like, but of course, there'll just be more rumors to take its place, I'm sure, even now. What we hope with this, and this is why we filed, and why we're incredibly grateful for another attorney, Shay Hughes, who's your public defender on Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah, I want to mention that we had some invaluable assistance on this from this attorney,
MVP.
Shay Hughes. Shay Hughes, he's on Instagram as Who's Your Public Defender. He's posting really invaluable legal analysis all the time. This is the guy who's in the trenches of the legal system here. And I'd certainly recommend that anybody interested in this case go on Instagram and follow him.
He's awesome. But I feel like while we wanted to do this and why we filed it was because we really feel like now that we're, and as you guys always say, it's all going to come out in court with a trial. Now that we're speeding towards trial, now that some of the investigative concerns are diminished, frankly, and that releasing information is not going to be as problematic. It just seems like a good opportunity for the public to see how boring and boilerplate this whole situation is, and why it's just not that interesting. Everybody's like, oh, the judge is delayed in releasing this a few days. It's a cover up, and you got to be gotta be like, we get it, but no, it just, everything takes a long time. Everything's very clunky. The things we believe are working. The defense attorneys, we've talked about some of their things today, but generally we feel like they're going to be putting up an energetic defense for this guy. We feel like the prosecutor's doing what he needs to be doing, and the system hopefully can be shown to be working as it is, and we can all see that and, shine the sunshine on it, and maybe it'll be less scary and mysterious for everybody. We won't make up cat hair rumors anymore.
So well said, right? The best way to kind of dispel these crazy theories and crazy misinformation, which, by the way, doesn't just exist in Reddit world. It has real effects on real people. It can sway the potential jury pool. It can affect the victims' families. It can affect, there are lots of victims, as we've talked about in this case, some that we may not even directly know, the family members of Richard Allen. There are many people who can be affected by these words that are carelessly dashed off on a keyboard behind anonymous names. They have real life effects on the judicial system. And I think you've put it so, so well when you say that when you're reading these documents, it's not even that they're boring. It's that you see how there isn't some vast conspiracy with everyone, the prosecutor, the defense, the witnesses, the wife, the anything. There's not vast conspiracy. There is a system in which this all has to process through, and it's working its way through that system. And that system, thankfully, is, if you actually read it, not filled with Perry Mason moments or bombs going off, because we don't want, if we were in that situation, if we're a defendant or we are a victim trying to be vindicated, we don't want a judicial system that is made for TV movie. We want a just and process-filled system that gets as close to the truth as possible. And that is something that's systematic, one foot in front of the other. And so I think this is a great way to educate the public, but also to make sure that there's not misinformation out there that have real effects on this case and on people who this case touches. So thank you guys again for doing that. And a question that people, and I'll let you guys answer this, a lot of people have been asking, okay, 118 documents have been released today. Will there be more documents released in the future? Because, of course, the docket for this case is not public in the sense that you can't just go click on things. So would you guys like to answer that?
Well, I know some of the documents that were not made public today were things like ex parte filings. And of course, those are cases where the defense is being funded by the government, they're public defenders. And so they will need to go to the judge and say, oh, we need this particular witness as an expert and to do some tests, and it's going to cost this much money. And obviously, it wouldn't be fair for the prosecutor to have like a heads up on who they're hiring and what the results of those tests are. So because of that, those types of motions are kept sealed and very properly so. Also, I believe there's some filings that were not made public today related directly to Richard Allen's mental health records. And obviously, a person's health records are private, and that's also proper.
Absolutely. Thank you for helping clear that up. And also, like you said, I think the court was trying to be careful in the 100, almost 20 documents they're releasing. I've been on the other side working for a judge where we had to release documents, and I was like, oh my gosh, don't let me be the one to let out someone's phone number or someone's social security number, which, there are reasons that personal identifying information should not be let out. And so they were being careful. And honestly, a few days to make sure 120 documents worth of information was properly released is not that long. Having been, burning the midnight oil as the clerk, making sure that was the case.
Yeah, I thought they worked pretty quickly. And a lot of people were like, do you think they're changing their minds? Are they going to just, burn it all? And no, I just think it just takes a while.
These are all good people.
Okay, and you mentioned Perry Mason, and I feel like people should read more Scott Turow because it's also really exciting and good legal fiction. But he does a good job of showing there's good people on both sides who are not perfect, but are usually trying to do their best with a flawed, but in many ways very good system. And that's a better, I think, thing for people to be thinking about with this.
Well, look, I think we've covered everything that's relevant and important in this case so far. I'm hopeful that as these developments continue in the future, that you guys will join us again for future episodes to talk about this stuff.
We love talking to you, so
we love talking to you too.
We really do. And, thank you guys again for the public service that you've done here. And thank you for continuing to kind of report on what's going on, being the boots on the ground there, and for always being willing to talk to us. We absolutely love talking to you guys. And I think there will be probably a lot more opportunities for us to talk in the future if you gues are open to it.
Absolutely.
We would love that. And thank you so much you guys always ask great questions, and we always really enjoy speaking with you. And so, yeah, anytime.
Well, thank you guys so much. Well, before we sign off for the day, Brett, Anya, Kevin, anything you'd like to add about the documents that were released in the Delphi case today?
We just, for anyone who might be concerned, understandably, about, releasing documents or, it's going to hurt the case, just know the judge is a former prosecutor and very meticulous. That's her reputation. So now is the time for this information to start coming out. And so we really believe that this ultimately will be good for the public, good for the case, and will clear up a lot of stupid rumors. So that's why we
I
did
couldn't
it.
say it better.
Yeah.
I love that. And of course, you guys can always be listening to the Murder Sheet on the most up-to-date information and reporting on the Delphi case. And we are so, so grateful that you guys took time today to speak with us. And we look forward to many more conversations with you. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. For a lot of people. Uh-oh. Okay, no. Baby's still asleep. Okay. As far as I know. Okay. Are you ready to record?
Hold on. Oh my
Hi.
Goodness.
Goodness
Okay.
gracious. I'm just trying to get these people out of here.
I'm ready.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, record. Okay. We're doing, you want to do Heather first or?
Well, let's do Heather first.
Heather. I'm going to get nervous because she did such a good one for us.
I know. You better knock it out of the park.
I'm not going to because she's amazing.
Big mad talking points.
I like that.